Humans broke free from quarantine. The Galactic Council trembled. Isaac Hawke sat in his small cell, the walls cold and metallic, with just the faint hum of the energy systems echoing around him. His hands were clasped tightly behind his back, the cuffs cold against his wrists. He had long since stopped trying to break free of the restraints. His mind, however, was still as sharp as ever. The quarantine had been enforced almost 2 years ago after humanity's first major contact with the Galactic Council. Initially, the Council had been hopeful. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but they were a new species, an unknown variable in the vast expanse of the galaxy. They were not the first species the Council had encountered, but they were the first to come with such raw, unpolished potential. At least that's what humanity's first ambassadors had believed. It wasn't long before things went wrong. Isaac had been part of the First Contact mission, a project that had seemed so full of promise at the beginning. They were supposed to establish peaceful relations with the alien races of the galaxy, learn from their technology, share humanity's accomplishments. But instead, humanity had stumbled into a conflict they couldn't understand, igniting a war between factions that had coexisted peacefully for centuries. And just like that, Earth was branded a dangerous species, and Isaac was locked away on this station. The Galactic Council had been ruthless in their decision, isolating Earth and preventing any further contact with the stars. Isaac knew the reasons. They saw humanity's mistakes as too great a risk to allow for another chance. They thought humans were too volatile, too unpredictable, a spark that could easily start another galaxy-wide fire. And so, Earth had been quarantined. Humanity was to remain on its homeworld, contained, its future sealed behind an invisible barrier. The Council had thought they could control humanity's fate. They were wrong. Isaac had always known that they would come for him. That was what happened when you were involved in an event like the one humanity had caused. He had been sent to negotiate peace, to hold the line for humanity, and now here he was, a prisoner of the very system he had once hoped to be part of. His mind shifted to the future. What would happen next? He had no illusions that the Council would let him go easily. He was a symbol now, a reminder of humanity's defiance. They wouldn't simply free him. They would use him to make an example of the entire species. Isaac had spent months thinking of ways to escape. He had done the math, figured out the guards' schedules, found the hidden weaknesses in the station's security grid. Every time he tried to make a move, though, the system tightened. They were always one step ahead. The Council had anticipated every possibility. Still, Isaac wasn't like the others who had given up in this place. He wasn't the kind of man to lie down and accept his fate. He had seen enough of the galaxy to understand that no one was truly imprisoned as long as they still had their mind, their will, and their heart. That's what he had left. Suddenly there was a soft click. Isaac didn't have time to react before a sharp voice cut through the silence. "Hawke, are you awake?" Isaac's eyes flickered to the small, circular camera embedded in the wall above his head. It was one of the few devices the station used to monitor its prisoners. The voice belonged to a council officer, one of the many assigned to keep an eye on him. "I'm awake," Isaac replied flatly, keeping his voice steady. He wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of knowing how much this confinement had affected him. "What do you want?" The officer didn't answer immediately. Isaac could hear the faint sound of footsteps as the officer approached. A panel in the wall next to Isaac slid open, and a small tray with food was pushed through. Isaac could smell it before he saw it. Nourishment, bland and tasteless, the kind of food they fed prisoners who were meant to be kept alive but not comfortable. It was the same meal every day. Isaac stood, moving toward the tray, but before he could take it, the officer spoke again. "You've been here for a long time, Hawke. What do you think will happen if you just sit here waiting? Do you really think the Council will show mercy?" Isaac's hand froze over the tray. He looked up at the camera, his eyes narrowing. "Mercy isn't something the Council knows how to give," he said softly. "Mercy is for those who can be controlled. I don't think they've figured out what to do with me yet." The officer's voice was cold, almost mocking. "You're a relic of a past age, Hawke. You were useful once, but humanity's time is over. The Council is already planning your execution. You won't be around long enough to see the full consequences of your species' failure." Isaac's jaw clenched. He didn't need to hear this. The officer didn't know what he was talking about. Humanity hadn't failed. They had been reckless, yes, but they had learned. And now they were ready to prove that they could adapt and thrive in the galaxy. "I'm not a relic," Isaac said firmly, "and I'm not going to sit here and die just because the council says I should." The officer was silent for a moment, and then Isaac heard the sound of footsteps retreating. The panel slid shut, and the room returned to its quiet solitude. Isaac stared at the food tray in front of him but didn't touch it. He wasn't hungry. His mind was elsewhere, on the future, on the rebellion that was brewing in the dark corners of the galaxy. He had heard whispers, rumors of humans who were working to break free, to overthrow the Council's chokehold on Earth. But none of that mattered unless he could escape this cell, this isolation. He needed a plan. Isaac's thoughts raced. If there was one thing he knew about the Council, it was that they underestimated humans. They thought of humans as a chaotic, untamable species. But Isaac knew better. He knew that humans could adapt, outsmart their enemies, and turn the tide in their favor. It wasn't a matter of brute force. It was about understanding the weakness in the system and exploiting it. As the hours passed, Isaac continued to watch the cameras, study the guards, routines, and memorize every detail of his surroundings. It was the only way to get out. The first step was to make them believe that he was no longer a threat. He needed them to think he had given up. And when they did, that would be the moment he would strike. The days passed in a blur for Isaac. He had stopped keeping track of time long ago, letting the minutes slip by without any attempt to count them. The only markers of time were the food trays that slid through the panel, the monotony of his cell, and the cold hum of the station that never stopped. He had learned to sleep with one eye open, always alert, always watching. Every sound, every vibration in the walls, every shift in the air, he took note of it all. He had to. But despite the isolation, Isaac had a purpose now. He wasn't just waiting for a rescue or hoping for a miracle. He was planning. 2 days after the conversation with the officer, something changed. It was subtle at first, nothing more than a slight flicker of the lights, but it caught Isaac's attention. He didn't think much of it at first. The station was old and it had its quirks. But then the flickers became more frequent. Isaac's eyes narrowed as he realized that this might be his chance. Something was happening. The system was malfunctioning. He leaned closer to the wall where a small panel with a blinking light had been installed. He didn't know exactly what it was, but the sudden flickering seemed important. It was as if someone outside his cell, was trying to send a message. Isaac's mind raced. Could this be the sign he had been waiting for? A mistake, a slip-up, a crack in the system. His heart started to beat faster. He had to act quickly. He couldn't afford to miss this opportunity. If the Council's system was malfunctioning, now was the moment to escape. But he would need help. He had spent the last few months getting to know the layout of the station in his mind. He knew the security systems, the guard rotations, the best routes to take, and the places where the surveillance cameras were weakest. But none of that mattered if he didn't have allies. The station was too secure to break out alone. He had to find someone who could help him slip past the guards and make it out of here. Isaac's mind drifted to the mysterious diplomat, Zara. He had received messages from her over the course of his confinement, encrypted messages that seemed to appear out of nowhere. She was the one who had told him about the Kerith, an alien race that had once allied with humanity. She was also the one who had hinted that not all factions within the galaxy agreed with the Council's treatment of Earth. The Council's decision to quarantine humanity wasn't unanimous. Some alien races had begun to question whether isolating Earth was the right move, especially considering that humans had been far more adaptable than the Council had anticipated. The Kerith had been watching, waiting for the right moment to act. And now it seemed the moment had arrived. Isaac closed his eyes and reached out mentally, focusing on the encrypted message Zara had sent him last week. It had been brief, a single line of text that had filled him with both hope and anxiety. The signal is active. Breakout begins soon. He had barely understood what she meant at the time, but now it made sense. The signal had to be the malfunction he had noticed. It wasn't just an accident, it was a coded signal. Zara was telling him that the rebellion, the resistance, was ready to act. They had found a way to break the Council's grip on the galaxy, and Isaac was about to play his part. He couldn't waste any more time. Isaac stood up, his legs stiff from hours of sitting, and moved to the far corner of his cell. There, hidden beneath a loose panel, was a small, crude tool that he had made over the past few months. It wasn't much, just a sharp piece of metal, but it was enough to cut through the thin wall panel that separated him from the rest of the station. He'd spent hours working on it, scraping and carving at the wall when the guards weren't looking. It wasn't perfect, but it would work. He took a deep breath and with steady hands began to slice through the wall. The metal was cold and unforgiving, but it gave way slowly. He could hear the distant hum of machinery in the background, the soft whir of the station systems, and the occasional beep from the guards' communication panels. But for now, everything seemed distant, far away. He focused on the task at hand, cutting through the panel with precision. It was hard work, and the process took longer than he had hoped. But eventually, the panel gave way with a sharp clang, and Isaac was able to pry it open. He paused for a moment, staring at the small hole he had created, a hole that led to freedom. But he didn't rush. He had learned to be patient in this place. Every step, every move needed to be calculated. Through the hole, he could see a small maintenance shaft, the kind used by station workers to repair equipment or check the system. It was dark and narrow, but it was a path, a way out. Isaac knew that if he wanted to escape, he would have to navigate these shafts. He had no idea where they led, but he wasn't about to let fear stop him now. This was his chance. Before he climbed through the hole, Isaac took a moment to gather his thoughts. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. The guards were still watching, and the security systems were still in place. But he also knew that the council had grown complacent. They had underestimated humanity's ability to think outside the box, to outsmart their enemies. And now it was time to show them just how wrong they were. Isaac slipped through the hole and into the maintenance shaft, the darkness swallowing him whole. The air was thick and stale, but he didn't care. He crawled forward, his eyes scanning the narrow space for any sign of movement. There were no guards here, no cameras. The only sounds were his own breathing and the distant hum of the station systems. The shaft twisted and turned, leading him deeper into the heart of the station. Isaac had no idea where he was going, but he trusted his instincts. He had spent enough time studying the station's layout to know that this was his best chance. After what felt like an eternity of crawling, Isaac reached a small junction. A few cables ran along the walls, and there was a small door at the far end of the corridor. It looked like an access point to one of the main chambers, the kind of place where the guards gathered to monitor the station's security systems. Isaac knew that if he could get past that door, he'd be one step closer to freedom. He approached the door cautiously, checking the area for any sign of movement. There was no one around. Taking a deep breath, he reached for the control panel beside the door and began to work on it. It was a simple system, and he had enough knowledge to disable the security measures. With a soft click, the door slid open. Isaac slipped inside, his heart pounding in his chest. The room was empty, but it was full of surveillance equipment. This was the heart of the station's security systems. It was the perfect place to make his next move. But just as he was about to begin tampering with the equipment, he heard a voice. "Stop right there!" Isaac froze. The voice was familiar, but it wasn't from one of the guards. It was from Zara. She was here. Isaac froze in place, his body tense as the voice echoed through the small chamber. He knew that voice. It was unmistakable. "Zara," he whispered, barely daring to believe it. His mind raced. How had she gotten here? How had she found him? A faint click sounded from behind him, and he turned slowly. There, stepping into the dim light from the shadows, was Zara. Her appearance was just as he remembered. Slender, her dark blue skin glowing faintly under the artificial lights, her silvery eyes sharp and determined. She looked as if she had walked through a storm, her clothes slightly torn and covered in dirt. But she was here, and that was all that mattered. "How did you—" Isaac started, but Zara raised a hand, silencing him. "I've been watching," she said, her voice low and calm. "Ever since you first came here, I've been monitoring the station. I knew you wouldn't stay locked up forever. I just had to wait for the right moment." Isaac's heart raced. He hadn't expected her to be so close, not so soon. "You came for me." Zara's lips curled into a tight smile. "I came for more than just you, Isaac. I came to help you break free, but you have to move quickly. The council is already aware of the anomaly. It won't be long before they send reinforcements." Isaac nodded, absorbing the weight of her words. The council's attention was now firmly on them, and their time was running out. He glanced around the room, his mind racing through the possibilities. The surveillance equipment around him flickered with light, a silent reminder of how much danger they were in. "Let's get out of here," Isaac said, his voice steady but urgent. Zara stepped forward, her eyes scanning the room. "This way," she said, her voice now carrying the weight of command. She moved swiftly, her feet barely making a sound as she led him deeper into the heart of the station. Isaac followed, his mind still spinning. He hadn't seen Zara in person for months, and yet here she was, appearing like some sort of ghost, an ally when he needed one the most. But he couldn't afford to dwell on the mystery of how she had gotten here. The only thing that mattered was escaping before the council found them. They moved quickly, their footsteps light and quick on the metal floors. Zara led them through a series of narrow corridors, all of them quiet and empty, the echoes of their movement lost in the hum of the station's machinery. Isaac tried to keep his breath steady, but his pulse was hammering in his chest. The feeling of being so close to freedom was almost intoxicating. It had been so long since he had felt like this, alive, ready to fight, ready to win. Finally, they reached a maintenance hatch, concealed behind a wall of pipes and conduits. Zara crouched down, pulling a small device from her pocket. She ran it over the hatch's lock, and with a soft beep, it clicked open. She motioned for Isaac to follow her as she crawled inside, vanishing into the darkness. Isaac hesitated for only a second before following. The narrow tunnel felt cold and cramped, but it was a path, his path to freedom. He pressed forward, keeping close to Zara's form in the darkness. The air was thick with the smell of grease and metal, but Isaac didn't mind. Every step took him closer to escape. The tunnel twisted and turned, and for a moment Isaac lost track of where they were. He relied on Zara's steady movements to guide him. She seemed to know the station better than anyone, and Isaac was grateful for it. After what felt like an eternity of crawling through the narrow, winding passages, they finally reached another door, a simple metal panel. Zara ran her device over it, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. They stepped into another corridor, much larger than the maintenance tunnel, and Isaac felt the tension in his chest loosen just a little. Zara turned to face him, her eyes intense. "We're close now, but there's a security checkpoint ahead. The guards won't be far." Isaac nodded, his hand instinctively reaching for the small communicator strapped to his wrist. It was a crude device, but it had allowed him to communicate with Zara when they were separated. He clicked it on, scanning for any signs of movement. The silence of the station was almost unbearable, and he could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Zara moved forward, her pace quickening as she led them through another series of corridors. The air grew colder the deeper they went, and Isaac's skin prickled with the awareness that they were approaching the station's nerve center. It was a place Isaac had never been allowed to see, a place where the council's power was concentrated, where decisions about Earth's quarantine were made. They reached a large chamber, a vast room filled with glowing screens and banks of computers. The chamber was silent, save for the faint hum of machinery. The walls were lined with guards, but they were far enough away that Isaac and Zara could move unseen. Zara turned to him, her face set with determination. "This is it," she whispered. "We can't go through the main routes. We'll have to use the ventilation shafts." Isaac glanced up at the ceiling, where a large vent grills were visible. He nodded in agreement. The vents were a tight fit, but they were their best chance of getting past the guards undetected. Zara moved toward the nearest vent, pulling out a small tool to pry the grill open. Isaac watched her work, admiring the efficiency with which she moved. She was a pro. She'd done this before. With a quiet click, the vent cover came loose, and Zara slid it to the side. She motioned for Isaac to follow. He did, climbing into the vent behind her. The shaft was narrow, and Isaac had to bend low to fit, but he didn't mind. The deeper they went into the station, the more they were leaving the council's control behind. The thought of escaping, of finally breaking free, kept him moving forward, even as the tunnel became increasingly claustrophobic. They crawled through the vent for what seemed like hours, winding their way through the station's infrastructure. It was disorienting, and Isaac began to lose track of the direction they were heading. But Zara seemed confident, her movements sure and deliberate. Finally, they came to another vent opening, this one leading to a small chamber. Zara reached up and pushed the vent cover aside, revealing a ladder that led down to the floor below. Isaac's heart beat faster as he climbed down the ladder, Zara following him closely. The moment his feet hit the floor, he took a deep breath and scanned the room. It was another hallway, but this one was different. It was quieter, darker, less patrolled. It looked like a hidden section of the station, a place where the council didn't expect anyone to be. Zara turned to him, her face grim. "We're almost there. The docking bay is just ahead." Once we're on the ship, we'll be safe. Isaac nodded, his mind focused entirely on the next step. But before they could take another step, the sudden sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. A guard turned the corner, his eyes locking onto them. Isaac's heart skipped a beat. He was too far into the mission to be caught now, but Zara was faster. She darted forward, grabbing the guard by the neck and pulling him into the shadows before he could raise an alarm. The guard struggled for a moment, but Zara's grip was firm, and in seconds he went limp. She lowered him gently to the ground, her eyes meeting Isaac's. "We need to move now," she said, urgency in her voice. Isaac didn't need any more prompting. Together they slipped past the fallen guard, moving as quietly as possible. The docking bay was just ahead. Isaac's pulse hammered in his chest as he and Zara moved quickly through the shadows of the station. The guard was down, but the silence that followed felt heavy, as though the entire station was holding its breath. They had no time to waste. Every second counted. They reached the docking bay, the heart of the station's exit system. Through the narrow hallway, Isaac could just make out the faint hum of energy systems powering the bay. He didn't need to be told how crucial this moment was. Once they reached the ships, once they were on their way to freedom, the battle would be over. But getting there wouldn't be easy. The bay itself was large and dimly lit, filled with docking platforms, massive cargo ships, and sleek alien vessels. Isaac could feel the presence of the Council's security tightening around him. There were guards stationed at every entry, each one armed and vigilant. But none of them were watching the shadows, at least not yet. Zara led the way, slipping through the maze of ships with ease. Isaac followed closely behind, doing his best to stay as quiet as possible. The adrenaline in his veins was nearly overpowering, but he focused on his breathing, forcing his mind to stay calm. Every step, every move needed to be calculated. They made their way past a few empty ships until they reached a small, unmarked vessel. It was sleek and silent, the perfect choice for their escape. The ship didn't belong to the Council. It was one of Zara's allies, a Kareth vessel designed for stealth and speed. It could get them out of the station and into open space without detection. Isaac could feel the weight of the moment as they approached it. Zara moved with purpose, her hands deftly working the controls to open the hatch. She turned to Isaac, her expression tight with urgency. "We need to get inside now. Once we're in the air, I can take us to a safe location." Isaac nodded, his eyes scanning the area one last time. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that the danger wasn't over yet. But he didn't have the luxury of second-guessing himself now. They were so close. They slipped inside the ship, and the hatch closed behind them with a soft hiss. Zara immediately moved to the cockpit, her hands flying over the controls, guiding the ship to life. Isaac took a seat beside her, watching the screens flicker to life. They were nearly ready to launch. "Do you have the coordinates?" Isaac asked, his voice low, careful. Zara didn't answer immediately. She focused on the console in front of her, her fingers moving quickly over the buttons. Finally, she looked up at him, her eyes meeting his with a flicker of determination. "I do, but we need to leave the station first. There's still a chance that the Council's forces will notice the ship's energy signature." Isaac's heart sank at the words. The last thing they needed was a full-on pursuit. The Council's ships were faster and better equipped. A direct confrontation was out of the question. He knew they needed to disappear fast. Zara pulled the ship out of its docking position, moving slowly at first, testing the station's sensors. She glanced at Isaac, her eyes narrow. "We're going to have to make this quick. Stay low and don't make any unnecessary moves. Once we're clear of the station's perimeter, we'll jump into FTL, faster than light, and they won't be able to track us." Isaac nodded, his hand resting on the seat's armrest as the ship slowly glided toward the edge of the docking bay. The ship's engines hummed softly, and the small vessel floated into the vast expanse of space. It was quiet, eerily so, and for a moment Isaac allowed himself to relax. They were free. They had made it past the first hurdle, but just as he thought that, an alarm blared. Zara's fingers moved quickly across the console, and Isaac saw the warning lights flash on the screen. "Damn it," she muttered under her breath. "They've noticed us." Isaac's heart skipped a beat. "What do we do?" Zara didn't waste time answering. She slammed the ship into full throttle, and the vessel jerked forward, narrowly missing the station's outer wall. Isaac could see the massive silhouettes of Council ships in the distance, their shapes outlined against the backdrop of distant stars. They were moving fast, too fast. "Stay down," Zara barked, her voice cold and controlled. "They'll try to lock onto our signal. I'm switching to evasive protocols." Isaac barely had time to react before the ship veered hard to the left, spiraling into a sharp turn. The gravitational pull tugged at Isaac's stomach, but he clenched his teeth, refusing to lose his focus. He could hear the sound of council ships closing in behind them, their engines growling like beasts on the hunt. Zara's hands flew across the controls, expertly guiding the ship as they darted between larger vessels, using the station's structures for cover. They weaved in and out of the chaos, a blur of speed and precision. Isaac's mind raced with the sudden realization of how close they were to disaster. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. One wrong move and the council would have them in their sights. "They're almost on us," Isaac said, his voice tense. "What now?" Zara didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were locked on the view screen as she calculated their next move. The council's ships were fast and they had more firepower, but Zara was a master at evading pursuit. She had done this countless times before. Isaac watched as the ship dipped lower, close to the station's surface. Zara was guiding them toward the station's power core, the central hub that controlled the energy of the entire station. It was risky, too risky, but Isaac understood the plan. Zara was going to use the core's energy to mask their escape, creating a burst of interference that would confuse the tracking systems. It was their only chance. "Brace yourself," Zara shouted, her voice filled with determination. Isaac didn't hesitate. He gripped the seat tightly, preparing for what was to come. With a sudden burst of speed, Zara piloted the ship directly toward the station's energy core. The ship's engines roared, and the ship shook as they passed through a dangerous electromagnetic field. Isaac's head spun, and the alarms blared even louder as the ship surged forward. Suddenly, the ship shuddered violently. Isaac's breath caught in his throat. The interference had worked, sort of. The council ships behind them faltered for a moment, their sensors going haywire as the core's energy disrupted their tracking systems. It was just enough to give Zara the opening she needed. "Now!" Zara shouted, her voice sharp with urgency. With one final, precise move, Zara pulled the ship into a sharp right turn and activated the FTL drive. The ship lurched forward, and in the blink of an eye, they were hurtling through space at faster-than-light speeds. The station behind them was a distant memory, and the council ships were left in their wake. Isaac exhaled deeply, his entire body aching from the sudden adrenaline rush. He could feel his heart slowing down, the tension melting away as the ship stabilized. Zara didn't speak for a moment. She let the ship's FTL engines carry them farther away from the station, deeper into the safety of uncharted space. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but filled with a sense of relief. "We did it," she said, her eyes meeting Isaac's. "We're free." Isaac let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He looked out at the stars ahead, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over him. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to believe that they might actually make it. But even as they sped through the void, Isaac knew that this was only the beginning. The council wouldn't stop searching for them. They would never stop hunting humanity. But for now, at least, Isaac and Zara had won a small victory. They had broken free. Isaac sat back in his seat, his body still trembling from the adrenaline of their narrow escape. The stars outside the small cockpit window stretched into long lines as they hurtled through faster-than-light space. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Isaac allowed himself a moment of calm. The silence between him and Zara was comfortable, but it didn't last long. Zara's hands moved steadily over the controls, her focus unwavering. Her sharp eyes darted from one screen to the next, checking their trajectory, making sure the council hadn't found some way to track them. The ship's systems hummed softly, and the faint glow of distant stars illuminated the cockpit. "We're safe for now," Zara said, her voice steady but still tinged with the tension of the escape. "The FTL jump masked our energy signature. They won't be able to track us for at least a few hours, maybe longer." Isaac nodded, his eyes fixed on the stars ahead of them. He wanted to believe it. After everything they had been through, this moment, this brief moment of freedom, felt almost unreal. They had escaped. They had actually escaped the council's control. For so long, he had been stuck in that station, trapped by walls that seemed to grow higher every day. But now, the galaxy was wide open before him. "Where are we going?" Isaac asked, breaking the silence. Zara didn't hesitate. We're heading to a neutral zone. A place where the Council has no reach. There's a planet, a moon, really, that some of my allies are using as a base of operations. We'll lay low there for a while, regroup, and figure out our next move. Isaac felt a knot in his stomach. It wasn't over yet. They had escaped, yes, but the Council was relentless. And the more Isaac thought about it, the more he realized that escaping wasn't enough. The Council's grip on the galaxy wasn't just about isolation, it was about control. The whole system was built on fear, on domination. And humanity's defiance had shaken it to its core. Isaac looked over at Zara, her face illuminated by the glow of the controls. She was calm, but Isaac could see the edge in her eyes, the quiet determination that had always been there. She had been working toward this moment for a long time, but even she knew that this wasn't the end. "I'm not going to stop," Isaac said suddenly, his voice low but resolute. Zara glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" "I'm not just going to hide," Isaac continued, his words coming faster now. "We've gotten this far, and we can't just sit back and wait for the Council to come after us again. We need to take the fight to them." Zara was silent for a moment. The only sound in the cockpit was the steady hum of the ship's engines. Then she turned to him, her eyes piercing. "You're talking about war, Isaac." Isaac nodded, his fists clenching. "The Council controls too much of the galaxy. They've destroyed countless lives. We've seen what they're capable of. If we don't stop them now, they'll just keep taking, and they'll keep isolating Earth. I'm not going to let that happen. I won't let humanity be their prisoners forever." Zara studied him for a long time, her expression unreadable. Then she sighed, leaning back in her seat. "I knew you were going to say that," she said softly. Isaac raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Zara smiled, a slight curve to her lips. "I've been in this fight longer than you think. I didn't come to help you just because you were a prisoner. I came because I knew that humanity could be a turning point in all of this. You've seen it too. The Council doesn't just control planets, they control minds. They make people believe that they can't fight back, that they can't win. But you're different. You remind me of what we've been fighting for all along." Isaac was quiet for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. He had known that Zara was more than just a diplomat, more than just an ally. But hearing her say it so plainly made him realize how deep her commitment went. She wasn't just trying to help him. She was trying to help the galaxy. He took a deep breath. "So, what do we do next?" Zara's eyes hardened with resolve. "We find others who are ready to fight. There are plenty of groups, rebels, defectors, those who have suffered under the Council's rule. We'll form an alliance, a rebellion." Isaac felt a spark of hope ignite inside him. It was crazy, dangerous, but it was their only chance. If they could unite the galaxy's oppressed, if they could give people the strength to stand up to the Council, maybe, just maybe, they could change everything. "We can't do it alone," Isaac said. "We need a plan." Zara nodded. "I know, and that's why we're going to the moon. We'll meet up with the Careth there. They've been preparing for something like this. They've got ships, weapons, supplies. We'll need all of it." Isaac stood up, feeling the weight of the decision settling over him. He knew there was no turning back. There was no going back to the way things were. The fight was just beginning. "We can't just hide. We can't just wait for them to come to us," he said, his voice steady. "We need to make sure the galaxy knows that humanity isn't weak. We're not just another species to be isolated. We're not going to be forgotten." Zara watched him, her expression softening. "That's the spirit that will change everything. But be careful, Isaac, this won't be easy. The Council won't just back down. They'll fight us every step of the way." "I know," Isaac said quietly, "but we'll fight back together." They both sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what they were about to undertake settling over them. The galaxy was vast, and the Council was powerful, but Isaac had seen the potential of humanity, the strength in its will to survive. And now, more than ever, he knew that they could rise above the fear that the Council had instilled in so many. Zara finally spoke again, her voice filled with quiet determination. "We'll need to gather as many allies as we can. The Careth are just the beginning. There are other species, other groups who want to see the Council fall. We have to show them that they're not alone." Isaac nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. There were so many factions out there, so many races who had suffered under the Council's control. But if they could unite them, if they could give them a reason to fight, it would be the beginning of something bigger than any of them. The ship hummed along, the vast emptiness of space stretching out before them. Isaac looked out the window, the stars shining brightly as they sped past. They were no longer just running from the council. They were running towards something greater, a future where humanity would not be caged, where the galaxy would no longer be controlled by fear. It was only the beginning.